Angular 2 component, metadata, and template. So here we are going to talk about the building blocks of Angular 2 application, and we're going to spend most of our time on understanding component, template, and metadata. And basically building Angular 2 application is building component tree in which you are going to build multiple components, and these components will build a tree structure. We're going to talk about the concept of a view encapsulation, and we are going to see how we can use ng content element, and we are going to see how Angular 2 applications gets bootstrapped. Building blocks of Angular 2 application. So this is the picture that you can see in Angular 2 website. This is an architecture of Angular 2 application. So here, this is a component, and this component you can think of it as a class, JavaScript TypeScript class, which is annotated with metadata. It's using decorator, meaning annotations, and it's associated with what is called a template. So this template is actually providing a view. Okay, so combination of these three things, template, metadata, and component, in fact create a component. So you can think of all these three things together as a component, or you could actually use the class as a component. But in general, when we say component, we are talking about combination of these three things: template, metadata, and component. Component class could actually use services. Services, you can think of them as just classes. Okay? And a template could use what is called a directive. Now let's focus on this template, metadata, and component first. So what is a component? What is Angular 2 component? Components are fundamental building blocks of Angular 2 applications. So you can think of writing Angular 2 application is basically a process of building component into component tree. Okay? This component is represented by a tag or element. So you can think of, you're basically extending HTML vocabulary. HTML has H2, H5, H4, or P element and things like that. These components are representing new vocabulary, new tags, or new elements that you can use to build Angular 2 applications. So as we saw in the previous slide, a component is made of class, TypeScript class, metadata, which is annotating the class, and template is basically, you can think of them as HTML fragment. Okay, and component also uses services and other components. Okay, we're going to talk about these things later on in detail. Let's focus on class, metadata, and template first. So this is an example of component. So component is basically a class. So this is called hero list component, and it does have two properties: heroes and selected hero, which is a type of hero array and hero object type, and it has a constructor, and it does implement on init. This is an interface. Okay, so if you want to implement an interface, then you are going to use implement, just like in Java. Okay, now this is a metadata. So you can think of this metadata is just annotation. It's using add component, the decorator, which contains a JavaScript object that contains a selector property, template URL property, and providers property. Okay, we're going to actually talk about these things in detail moving forward. For now, I just want you to see example of component, okay, which is basically TypeScript class annotated with component, the metadata. Okay. So basically what it does is that component creates a view with new hero list element tag. So you could use a hero list element in your template. Okay, so that is a component. Let's talk about the template. What is a template? You can think of template is defining a component view. For now, it is HTML fragment. That tells Angular how to render the component. Okay, so simplest template is what you have seen Hello World app. So let's actually take a look at the Hello World app. So open folder and go to Hello World app. I don't need to save. So if you actually take a look at the code here, go to SRC app, and we have app component TS. So this is an example. Oh, this is the module. This is the component. So you see this is the app component, and it has a title, and it has what is called template URL, and this template URL is representing the template. So if you hear, this is the no, this one. Yeah, so you can see this one contains HTML fragment, and here is actually referencing what is called the title property of the component, which you see right here. Okay, so that's the reason, it's actually displaying app works. Okay, all right, so this is the simplest possible, simplest possible the template. Here. Okay, all right, so that is a template. It defines a component view. Okay, a bit more sophisticated template example. I don't expect you to understand all this, right? But basically you can think of this template as a combination of HTML tags, and it does have its own directive. Okay, so don't worry about these things for now. And you're basically using hero detail component, and it does have its own directive. Okay, so basically when you have a component defined, the component tag could be used in another template. Okay, so that's the key point I want to get across to you. But if you don't understand what I just talked about here, don't worry about it. Okay, so we just talked about the class, we talked about the template. Let's talk about the metadata. So metadata is basically decorating a class, TypeScript class. Metadata tells Angular how to process a class, just like annotation in Java is basically describing that class, right? Or method or parameter, same thing. Metadata is describing that Angular TypeScript class. So class itself is just a class, meaning TypeScript class is just a class. Class is not a component until you tell Angular about it through this metadata. So metadata is the one that actually make that class to be, in fact, a component, Angular 2 component. So template, metadata, and component class together describe a view, right? Okay, so this is a metadata example. Again, here, we are using component annotation to describe this hero list component. Okay, now there are several the properties in component here. So selector. So this is the name of the CSS selector that tells Angular to create and insert an instance of this component where it finds hero list tag in parent HTML. And this is the template URL, and this is the providers. Actually, I should actually remove this guy because this is actually an old way of actually doing things. I actually should remove this guy. Okay. All right. So again, if you don't understand what I'm talking about on this particular slide, don't worry about it. We can actually play around it, and we'll have a much better idea. Okay. So we're gonna do our first lap. So we are going to modify app component. So first, if you take a look at the app component.ts file here, you can see we have a component annotation, and we have a single property called AppWorks, right? So when you are actually running this application, so let's run this application again. So ng-serve, I'm not sure whether you are actually still running or not. So let me actually run it here in my case. If it's already running, then it will say that port is already being used or something like that. Okay. And again, you should be able to go to the 4200. Okay. And then if you refresh it, yeah, so it should actually open it up, and then it should actually display AppWorks. Okay, so now we're gonna actually change this AppWorks to something else. So I'm gonna say this is my first Angular 2 app. and just save it. All right, and you can see this is being changed. This is live reload, right? It will detect the change and then it will redeploy the application. So to application, so save the change. Okay. So whenever I make a change and save the change, it will reload the application. Okay. All right. So that's basically what's happening. And oops, yeah, I did. And we just changed the title of app component to my first Angular 2 application, and observe the browser gets refreshed automatically with the change. Okay, now as you have seen here, basically we have template URL, which is actually HTML here. Okay, that's where it's actually displaying the property value of title property of the component class. Now, when you take a look at the CSS file, so again, if you take a look at the component class, it does have a template which representing the view. It also have styles. So this styles URL has array of CSS file that will be used to style this template. Okay, so for now it doesn't have anything, right? Okay, so what we want to do is we want to change. If you take a look at HTML file, it does have H1 element. So we want to provide the styling. So you can actually have a color of red. So here we are going to have H1 and color, and we are going to actually red, and save the change. And then you are going to see this is going to be changing to red color. Okay, so whatever styling that you specify for H1 is being used to style your HTML template. Okay, so that is what's happening. And optional lab, so add H2 element and change the style of it. So here let's actually add in the style here we're gonna actually have H2, and we're gonna actually have color. Let's actually have green. Okay, and save the change. And in HTML file we are gonna have H2 element, and this is my H2, H2. Yeah, so we are gonna actually, we're gonna talk about the interpolation later on, so you might as well use the interpolation. So what you can do is you can go to app component here, and we are going to say name and Sang Shin. Okay, so I have added another property called the name, and in HTML template I should be able to access any property of the class. This is called interpolation. Interpolation, you basically use two curly braces. Again, we're going to talk about this one in detail later on. So here I can say name, all right, like this. And what we are going to see is we are going to see the name of Sang Shin is going to be styled with green. Okay, all right, so I'm going to let you do this exercise. I'll give you a few minutes to try this. Next exercise is we are going to actually use what is called the inline template and inline styles. Okay, so as you can see, each component has a template and styles. So you can you basically typically you're going to actually reference external file, but this could be actually inlined. So instead of template URL, I'm going to just comment this guy out. We're going to have inline template. Usually you don't want to do this because it's going to make your class a bit more crowded, right? But it is possible. So here you're going to actually use the back apostrophe as we have learned before, and we have to actually have comma here, and then we can actually provide here. So here we can have H1 element, and this is the title. We're gonna just have a name instead of the title, and then it's going to be H1 like this. Okay, so basically we are providing a template fragment right inside this class, in this component class. Okay, And same thing for styles. So instead of actually referencing external styles, you should be able to actually specify styles right here inline. Again, this is typically not recommended practice. So styles, and it's going to be array. And here again, you are using the template here. And here we are going to provide h1, the style. h1 style is again color. This time let's use the blue. Okay, and let's save the change, and we are going to see that changed. So this time we're gonna just display Sang Shin because the template just contains the name, right? Okay. All right. So this is inline template. I'm gonna give you a few minutes to try inline template and inline styles. Okay, so we want to use the external file, so I actually changed it back. So it's using external file for a template and external file for CSS file. Okay, so let's move on to the next. So component tree. So basically what we have seen is that when you create a brand new Angular 2 application, you create a single component, which is called the app component. So that's what we are seeing here, right? But using a single component is not that much useful. In general, you're going to actually create the bunch of the components in your Angular 2 application. So those components will actually create a component tree, which means they will have a relationship of parent and child. Okay. So this basically slide shows a parent and child relationship. So this root component and could have multiple child component A and child component B, and child component A could have its own child. Okay. This component again is a combination of a component class and annotations and template. Okay. So when you're building single page application in Angular, basically in that single page application you have a component tree in which these components have a tree structure kind of built in. So this is a component tree example. So suppose we have a parent component which is representing 12 heroes page, and then internally this is a detail page of a particular hero. So this is a child component and this is a parent component. So how a parent component will actually reference a child component? What it does is that in the parent component, it will use the name of actually the selector of the child component. So in this case, if you created a child component, it will actually have app child selector in the parent component template, and then it's going to actually use that child component. Okay. So how parent component and child components are kind of the known to Angular application. So child component needs to be all components need to be declared in the module. We're going to actually talk about the concept of a module. This is a different concept of module from JavaScript module. Okay, so the one that we talked about in TypeScript, that is a JavaScript module. The module we're talking about is the Angular module. Again, we're going to talk about that concept in detail later on. So, basically, when you're creating Angular 2 application, you create a module. In the module, all components need to be declared. Okay, so if you create a child component, it will be declared inside the declarations property of ng module. Okay. All right, so we are going to create a brand new component. We're going to call it child. All right, and then we're going to create another component, which is a sibling component to that child. And then we are going to, in fact, use the different selector. In fact, this is a CSS selector for child components. So we're going to actually try different things. Okay. All right, so let's actually try to create. So we have to create another terminal window. And we're going to create a new component. So you're going to use the ng command, ng generate, or you can just say g, and then component. Okay, so you can say component, or you can say just c. All right, and then name of the component. So I'm going to call the name of the component as a child. All right, and it will create a 4 files, again, template files, CSS files, and the spec, that is the testing code, and then component itself. Okay, and it created under child directory as a default. So if you actually take a look at the child directory, now we are seeing child component, right? So if you take a look at child component, basically it has its own component annotation. It does have its own template, and then it has its own styles. Okay, so style has nothing right now, and HTML is basically child works. Okay. And if you take a look at the module, it's automatically added, so you don't have to actually do these things yourself. Every time you create a new component using ng command, that component will be automatically added to the declaration, so you don't have to actually do add yourself. Okay. Now let's see, if you take a look at this, nothing is going to be, changing. I mean, still it's actually displaying the old, this is only coming from the parent HTML template, right? Child component does not get displayed. The reason is because we have to reference, we have to actually call, we have to use the child component in the parent template. So here we are going to use app child. Let's take a look at the app component. So you see, this is the selector. This is basically representing this child element. Okay, so app child, I'm gonna go to this parent. Here I can say app child, and when I add app child, now you are going to see that app child template is being displayed. It will say child works. Okay, so here if you take a look at the child component here, a child HTML file, again it says it's a paragraph and child works. Yeah, so here I'm gonna actually use H1. I'll use H1 I am child component and save the change. And then it's going to actually use this template, I'm child component, right? Okay. All right, so we have two components now. We have app component, and then we have a child component, and child component is actually being used inside the parent template HTML file here. Okay. All right, so that is what we did, and we're gonna create the well, actually, before we create the sibling component, let's actually try the different selector. As I said before, if you are seeing, if you take a look at the component class here, this is basically, I want to actually see the child component class. This is a CSS selector format. Okay, so for now it's actually referencing the element, right? But if you want to use a CSS style, so I can say like this, right? Then, so let's actually save the change and see what happens. It's going to actually, it's going to actually cause a problem because it could not find app child anymore. Okay, because we changed is the dot app child. What it means is that this child component will be displayed only when this app child is actually used the CSS style. So I have to go to this parent HTML. Okay, so instead of app child, I should actually use this guy as the let me just delete it, and I'm gonna actually have a div component. And here I have to use the CSS style class and app child like this. Okay, so I'm actually specifying app child as a CSS style, and whenever the Angular actually Angular actually scans the parent template, and it actually search for the app child component. Okay, and now let's save the change, and now it should actually work. All right, so I'm a child component. So basically I just want to demonstrate that the this is the CSS selector. Okay. All right, so I'm going to change it back, and then I am going to go to the application here, and here again I'm going to actually use the app child, and tab, and save the change, and again it should actually work as before. Okay, so now we have actually used child component using different CSS selector. Now let's create the another component. I want to actually create the sibling component in the same location. If you actually say ng gc and the sibling, then it will create another directory. But I want to actually create the sibling component in the same directory of child. In that case, you can use dash flat. That means I don't want to actually create another directory, subdirectory for that component. So I can say ngg, again, generate component and sibling and dash flat. Okay, then it will create again 4 files, but it will actually create, oh, you know what, the it actually create the in the, because I actually use the in hello app here, is actually creating these 4 files in this directory, and that's not what I want. Okay, so let me actually delete this guy. Yeah, unfortunately in Visual Studio Code there is no multi-line delete, so I have to actually delete one by one. This is a little bit tedious. So delete. I know that Visual Studio guy is actually working on multi-file selection. Okay, so what I need to do is I have to actually go to this child directory. So I'm going to actually say go to cd app and oops, yeah, actually I have to start from src here. So cd src and app and child. Okay, so this is the directory that I want to create my sibling components. Okay, so here I am going to ng generate component sibling dash flat. All right, so now it will create a sibling component in the same directory. So now we actually see these 3 guys, right? Okay, so if I want to display sibling in the parent template, I have to say again, if you take a look at the sibling component, the name of the selector is app sibling. Right? So here I'm going to use app sibling like this, and then we are going to see oops, what? Okay, so let's see module build. Yeah, there is something wrong. A message hidden. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, everything is fine. Let me see. You just create the template here, and yeah, so everything seems to be fine. So let's actually refresh and see what's going on. Yeah, so you still have a problem. So let's actually what is going on. So it has the yes, the error message is typically it cannot find module. So let's see yeah, so the error message sometimes is kind of vague, but usually give the reasonably good information. So it sent something create the module. So let's actually take a look at the app component module. Oh yeah, we actually have 2 siblings somehow. Oh yeah, so we actually have created 2 siblings, right? Yeah, so we're gonna actually delete the first one, and we're gonna delete this guy. All right, so save the change. Now it should work fine. Yeah, because we actually create a sibling component in the root directory, and then we delete those things. Whenever you create a component, the Angular Visual Studio Code will actually add that component in the module, and we actually happen to have a 2 sibling component. That's the reason it actually complained about it. Now it works fine, right? Okay. Yeah, so that's basically I want you to play around, and optional lab, you have time, create another child component. Okay. All right, so I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to try this lab. Next topic is view encapsulation. What do you mean by that? So view encapsulation basically allow the encapsulation of the view is actually per each component. Okay. So there is a concept of shadow DOM. So shadow DOM allows us to hide DOM logic behind elements. so without actually having the encapsulation, basically if you define a particular style, that style gets applied to all elements of the page, right? We do not want to do that. We want to actually have some kind of styling only applied to that particular component. So in our case, if you see, we have 3 components, right? So what we want to do is that whatever styles defined in child component will be applied only to child component. Whatever styles that you define in sibling, we want to get it to apply to only to sibling component. And for whatever app component here, we want to this H1 and H2 styling applied only to the elements defined in the app component template, right? So that's the view encapsulation. And how does Angular 2 actually handles this, right? It cannot actually use the shadow DOM because the shadow DOM is not available all browsers. So Angular 2 emulates the shadow DOM by attaching scope specific CSS class attribute. So whenever you have an element here, each element will have its own styling. In each of those styling, so I'm going to actually demonstrate that. So observe that. So let's actually do this exercise. So we have H1. So if you take a look at the app component, we have H1, right? The annotation. And then we have the child here. We have H1, but parent, this actually styling defined in the app component does not get applied to child, right? And that's what we want. If you actually take a look at, in fact, here, this is the child component H1. This is the styling applied to app component element, and this is from child component. So if we want to define H1 in child, we can say H1, and here with the color, in this case, I'm gonna use maybe orange. Okay, so the each component can have its own styling. So here, this is orange. Okay, again, the way that the Angular does is it handles this one is that each component have its own style. So if I take a look at the this element and inspect it, okay, you can see it's actually using this annotation for styling. So yeah, this is the H1. So it's not just the H1 that gets applied to all component. This is the you can see it's ng content TTI, TTT whatever and 1. But if you actually go over here and if you inspect the app component, this is actually ng content TTI 0. So this styling is different from the version of, again, if I go over here, it's different. So underneath they will have a different style, right? So that's reason the styling will be encapsulated in each component. All right, so that's basically what you're talking about. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys about 2 or 3 minutes to try this view encapsulation. So try to define component specific the styling, and observe that styling only gets applied to that particular component. Okay. Next topic is ng content. So what is the ng content for? So suppose if you want to use the child element multiple times, so let's actually go to parent template here. I'm gonna use the app child again, right? But we like to actually pass some content from the parent to the child, right? So instead of actually using cookie cutter a child component, we want to pass something here, right? And we want that to be used inside the child component. So here I want to actually pass this is the let's say paragraph. I'm going to use the paragraph. This is data from parent and 1. Yeah, data 1 actually. So I would say data 1 from parent. And we want to again here we're going to create the paragraph, and here this is the data number 2 from parent. Okay, Now, I mean, this is not being actually kind of used by the child. So, if you see the result, there is, nothing reflecting this value, right? So this is where you could actually use this value. You could actually, take this value and actually being displayed in a child. In order to do that, you can use the ng content. So you go to the child component here, and here I can have ng content. Okay, so here now when I use ng content, whatever the data that is actually provided by the parent will be actually used here to display child in the child component. Okay, all right, so I'll give you 2 minutes to try the ng content. Move on. Next topic is how Angular 2 application is being bootstrapped. When you run the application, it actually go to app component here and template. This is actually what gets displayed, right? So how does it work? So if you take a look at the app module, there is what is called the bootstrap app component. What it means is that this is the component that is providing. This is the component that is representing root component, right? So let's take a look at the modules. App module TS. This is where a particular component is specified as a root component. Okay. And also index HTML file. If you take a look at the index HTML file, that's where app root is actually being used. So we need some kind of a template where that root, the selector is being specified. If you take a look at the app component here, that is the name of the selector. So if I change this guy, app root 1, and obviously it will not work because in index HTML file, it will look for app, the root. Is if you take a look at the console, obviously it has the error, right? So in that case, in index.html file, so we have to change it to app root 1, something like this, and then it should work. Okay. Okay, so that worked, right? Okay, so now components are self-describing or self-contained. Okay, so components are designed as following. A component knows how to render itself. It has everything it needs to render itself. It contains the TypeScript class. It has the annotations, which contains the template and styles. A component configures dependency injection. We haven't talked about the dependency injection of the services or another component into a component yet, but it does handle all this dependency injection itself. So again, we're going to talk about this one in detail later on. A component has a well-defined public API of input and output properties. Again, we haven't talked about these things yet, right? So basically, I want you to remember that component is self-contained. Okay, so this makes Angular 2 component self-describing or self-contained. It contains all the information needed to instantiate them. So make components reusable. So instead of using the app component, we like to actually use the child component as a root. So here, let's actually in the app module, I'm going to use the child component as a bootstrap, meaning now child component is the root component, and also index HTML file. It should actually have app child. Okay, save all the changes. And now we are going to see child component is going to be the root component. Yeah, so that is the child component. So this exercise is basically indicating that a component is self-contained, and you can pick and choose a particular component as a root component. And if you happen to have a child component to this child component, meaning grandchild component, then again that could be reflected in the view. Okay. All right, so that is the exercise. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to finish this up, right? And